Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
Dear Mr. President, we're having trouble maintaining our highways, our bridges are crumbling, our airports are congested, our highways in urban areas are in gridlock for hours each day. We probably need some mass transit because we're using too much oil, too much foreign oil. Your response, raise your state and local taxes. You need help, look to the private sector. Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we'll look at the Bush administration's approach to energy and transportation and what we're doing about it here in Indiana. Our panelists are Russ Lough, president of the Muncie, Delaware County Chamber of Commerce, Christine Letts, Commissioner Christine Letts of the Indiana Department of Transportation, Tom Lowe from the Department of Natural Resources at Ball State University, and John Rouse, our producer and a member of the political science faculty at Ball State. Christine, how much help do we need from the federal government, and are we getting it?
Well, we need quite a bit of help from the federal government. The federal money comprises up to 30% of our total state highway funds, state and local highway funds that we use today, and we not only have to make sure that continues, but increases.
We want to get more government? Russ, is that what we're looking for?
I don't necessarily know that we're looking for more government. I think one of the frustrations overall is that I think it's been healthy to push a lot of responsibilities back towards the states and local government, but the trouble is they didn't push the monies with it. And of course, what I'd like to see is less federal spending, not necessarily in some of the key transportation areas, because I think that is vital to America. But I'd like to see some of the other federal spendings reduced to match the local control aspects and allow us those local monies to do the job. I do think, though, there's something to be said for local areas to have fundraising capabilities that would encourage either state or federal fundings to accelerate projects or to build projects. I came from one chamber where we had a half-cent sales tax increase totally dedicated to $500 million worth of road projects. And what the state did is the state said, since you're willing to help yourself, we will accelerate our help to you to so we both get a little bigger bang for our buck.
The politics, Larry, the politics are such that the Republican philosophy of the 1980s, Republican philosophy generally is to let the locals and the states do it. The president is not going to lead on this issue unless there's a crisis. There's a crisis in the Middle East, but the Middle East crisis has not come to the point that it is going to force Americans to do something other than to use cars and also airplanes. We get around in this country by two means. One is cars. We have to have highways, we have to have that kind of transportation. Number two, we also fly. So if you look at the infrastructure in terms of where the federal government has put its money, it's put its money into highways and also into airports. The policy is not going to change unless there's a crisis. The crisis has not yet come.
The notion that we have to have cars is an interesting one. Tom?
Well, I think this is a typical American bargain hunter's style. We want all these things, but nobody, of course, wants to pay for it. And as long as Uncle Sam will pay for it, the federal government, the image is that the federal government will pay for it, then we like to think that's a bargain for ourselves. But I think Russ's example of where a local community took initiative to tax themselves to provide additional transportation infrastructure system is a good one. On the mass transit issue, I think what we have to realize, I mean, it's a tough one for Americans and for Indiana in general, and we don't appreciate this in most of East Central Indiana, but in these large cities, the automobile is really a dinosaur. And we keep trying to build an infrastructure to support something that's really totally obsolete. Again, that's foreign to our experience here, but if you live in a major metropolitan area or on the West Coast, you get a real feel for that.
Yeah, but Tom, I think the problem is that we have a 1990 election coming up in about 2 months. Our politicians are not going to lead. Keep in mind that politicians do not run governments. They lead governments. And so we have to look to politicians and other people who are in this industry to lead. Now, once the Middle East crisis is over, the question is, are we going to go back and take a very hard look at transportation policy?
Who is leading transportation policy? Are we getting...
The governor and I are in Indiana.
Are you getting direction from the federal government as well? I mean, is there leadership there?
Well, there is leadership in the form of the recent National Transportation Policy that was recently released by the U.S. DOT. There will be leadership from the Congress in the form of a new Surface Transportation Act in 1991. But we believe it's very important not to isolate our policy waiting for that. And in fact, we're very involved in helping to form that policy. One of the key strategies for transportation in Indiana is to increase mobility for people and goods without more pavement. That's a key strategy that we have to begin now and carry on into the future.
But building roads is such a great short-term political thing to do. I mean, people like roads running right by their houses so they can get to where they want to, whenever they want to.
Sure.
But that's not a good policy.
It's up to us to make sure that we're investing appropriately in highways. There are times when more pavement and more lanes is appropriate to complement a transportation system, and there are times when we, the federal government, and the local communities should be investing in other forms. In Northwest Indiana, there's a very good example of the local politicians taking the lead in developing an alternate funding mechanism for public transit. They're going to put added sales tax into public transportation.
But how is that going to happen, given the fact that the cost of gas is going to go up? It's going up. That would mean that you're going to have less cars on the highways. That would also in turn mean that you're going to have less money coming from those cars to go back into taxes to pay for highways. Is that going to force light rail transit in places like Indianapolis, Lake County, for example?
Well, light rail transit is almost as expensive as highways, and so it's not going to force that per se, but it is going to force finding an alternate funding mechanism long-term for all forms of public transportation. We have to figure out a way of appropriately taxing propulsion systems that aren't our traditional gasoline or diesel-based fuel systems, or find another means of having population contribution to transportation infrastructure.
I don't think gas tax is the way to do it. Everybody benefits by good roads. If you never drive, all the products you buy got there probably by road at some point in time. And the reason why we opted for the half-cent sales tax approach was because everybody contributed to the roads, and it wasn't just limited to road projects. Some of it did go to mass transit. But I think gas tax is not the broadest base to use.
But there has been a gas tax.
Yes.
6-8 years ago, even the most conservative writers in this country, William Buckley, for example, were calling for a 50 cent a gallon tax on gasoline. This is hardly a liberal radical proposal. What we need are some politicians with the just good old guts to enact that tax. And we're going to pay a tax. We're either going to pay it to Hussein or we can pay it to ourselves. The price of gasoline is underpriced in the United States. And other countries have realized this. It doesn't, the fact that a gallon of petrol in England costs $3.82 a gallon, that doesn't mean the English are more inefficient in producing gasoline than we are. It costs about the same. The difference is a tax, and what they've realized is that there's a national security issue here. And one way to discourage automobile use is to increase the price of fuel.
And I think the thing that we want to tie together is the fact that transportation is very much associated with capitalism. And we have to have capitalism in the sense of entrepreneurship and growth, economic growth. Otherwise, we cannot tax those profits and put it back into infrastructures of highways and airports and perhaps rail. So it's very important in terms of transportation. I'm fascinated when I go onto the highway in a sense and I see all those trucks, and the deregulation of trucking is an issue that has faced this country in the last 10 years, because it's very important that people be able to move in capitalism. If we cannot move, we cannot sell. And growth is based upon those taxes.
But John, on energy, look at all the anti-groups. You're anti-coal, you're anti-nuclear, you're anti-offshore oil, you're anti-this, you're anti-that. When you look at energy uses, where are the pros? Where is enough consensus to strike off in a direction and do what needs to be done? We've got all the anti-groups defeating almost every energy source.
What's our alternative?
Well, but here we're not talking about, we don't run automobiles, or at least very few of them, by nuclear power or electricity. What we're talking about here is a liquid fuels problem. There will be those contributions to transportation sometime in the future, hopefully.
Right.
But for now, it's a liquid fuels problem. And that's what's going to be for the next 10 years. And what we need is a public policy that circles around that issue.
But Tom, you're not going to have a public policy in Indiana or the Midwest because it's in the best interest of the automobile industry, both in terms of labor and in terms of management, to have as many cars as possible, to have as many highways as possible. It seems that way to me. And so are you going to find a governor of Indiana or a governor of any Midwest state saying, let's have less cars, let's have less highways, let's build light rail transit?
Is Evan Bayh going to say that?
I think so.
Well, I'll be surprised.
I mean, we've got to find an alternate to just building pavement to take care of our congestion problems. And it is not just because of the energy issue, it's because of the cost issue. The number one issue for highways is the cost of building new highways. And at some point, the cost and the potential detriment to the environment is too much to bear, and we have to consider other alternatives. And this is the kind of thing that's just in the strategy stage at this point, but we've got to begin thinking about that for now, so that in 20 years, when people are more amenable to public transportation, and some of us shouldn't be driving anymore, for example, we will have had the foresight in the state to make public transportation available.
What's it going to take to get people more amenable to that? Are we going to have to raise the price of gas to $3 a gallon?
If Cecil Burhannon were here, that's exactly what he'd say, right? I mean, increased price discourages use. I mean, this is just a fundamental law of capitalism. And again, I would rather take that additional tax, and rather than send it off to the oil sheiks, I would rather keep that here in Indiana and here in the United States to rebuild the infrastructure, to maybe develop alternative modes of transportation. Where's the money going to come from to do this? It doesn't come from heaven. I mean, it has to come from someplace.
Yeah. How do you integrate that in a way? We're just going through a significant increase in gas prices. To now throw a tax on top of that could really be devastating to the economy. And so we've got to get to that point, but in a way that doesn't turn the economy upside down.
The first thing you have to do is lay that right in Ronald Reagan's lap.
Well, no, Tom.
10 years ago, we had a chance to do this, and we have wasted 10 years. Now it's infinitely more complicated. You're right.
But it's really going to come back to the local community, is it not? I mean, it's going to come back to Lake County, or it's going to come back to Indianapolis, or it's going to come back to Muncie, and the people of Muncie or these locations are going to have enough interest to go to town meetings and this kind of thing and express their views on these issues.
But politicians have to have the courage to lead. And they know that one of the things from public opinion polls, that one of the things that upsets the American people more than anything is tinkering with the price of fuel. That's a good way, excellent way to get yourself voted out of office. And we have a experience to our north where that happened to the Canadian Prime Minister. So, but somebody has to get out in front on this issue, begin to articulate the advantages that this has for us. But I'm not optimistic it's going to happen.
Well, I'm not so sure that just raising the gas tax is a panacea, too. I mean, that's kind of, in some respects, it's too much, too late. I think that better planning among all governmental entities can help us out in the future. Better use of the dollars we have, looking at alternatives to the traditional way we've thought about developing transportation systems or other systems, and things like that. I mean, I think we're fighting to get more of our dollars that we send to Washington back to Indiana. Just some things like that are where we can all work together to help ourselves without a drastic, negative incentive like a dramatic increase in gas taxes.
You said, and I mean, I realize it's in the very early stages, but you had said you wanted to move more people and not build pavement. Do you have any just kind of examples you could give us of what your thinking is?
Yes. One good example is establishing a freeway management system on our most congested highways. We're looking at first the Borman Expressway in Lake County, and second of all the corridor just north of Louisville in Indiana at 65 South. We believe that we can increase the capacity and mobility for for motorists along the Borman by as much as 30% with a combination of the new interchange configurations. That's the pavement part of it that's costing it an awful lot of money, and then installing response mechanisms. So we find out when traffic is stopped, we remove whatever it is that has stopped traffic quickly, and then also work in ramp metering, which actually controls access to the highway itself, controlling speeds, and variable message signing. It's worked in Chicago. I believe we're late in Indiana in getting started with this, but we're prepared to move forward on it within the next 12 months. And that's an example of we will not have put any more pavement in after these interchange improvements. We're not going to be adding travel lanes, but we expect to be able to increase the through traffic by as much as 30%.
Christine, if I can ask this question, how much will technology, for example, if we could have our automobile manufacturers produce cars that got 50 miles to a gallon or 75 miles to a gallon, politically and economically that's not feasible now. How much of the answer could come from technology improvement?
Well, I believe quite a bit. I think that the highway industry, I think, has lagged in terms of technological research in the past, and they're just beginning to get on board and joining with industry and some of the big universities to tackle how technology can help to, again, increase mobility without paying the enormous cost of just building new highways across the road. And I think that the modes of travel are beginning to work together as well. I think that we have modes that don't meet now. We've got air, we've got transit, we've got highways that don't come together at a corner. And so that's a key place where we have to begin to develop also.
John, the miles per gallon, that doesn't help the gridlock situation. And, in Southern California, they're saying that if they don't build $43 billion more worth of freeways in the next probably 15 years, traffic will be at 11 miles an hour. 43 billion. And so the miles per gallon doesn't help your gridlock situation at all.
I think I've noticed an interesting thing in the last, as an automobile freak, even though I say they're dinosaurs, I love them, but the automobile magazines I read, of course, 90% of them come from California. And it's interesting now, editorially, those magazines are now endorsing mass transit in California because the people who view the automobile as a toy, as a fun instrument, now they're in this gridlock situation, that's being taken away from them. So I think that's an interesting change in sort of their policy.
$43 billion, that's a lot of money. Is that a good investment for California, you think, Christine, in more highways?
No, I think a good investment is to invest in some pavement wisely where that's the best bang for the buck. But the other investment is in public transit and in disincentives for single passenger vehicles.
Since transportation is one good example of the freedom that we have in this country, the ability to get into a car and go where we want to go, ask this question. One of the purposes of this program has been to educate a democracy. Which personalities, besides the governor and the president, should educate a democracy on this issue? Who are the people we look to, besides yourself?
Who's going to answer that? John, you have an answer. You wouldn't answer it.
Well, I think...
What do you think, John?
Yeah, what do you think, John?
Well, I think, first of all, it has to come from citizens. And until citizens care enough to have change, leaders are going to respond to citizens.
Well, does the legislature really respond to a groundswell like that? Quite often they don't. I mean, obviously, citizens aren't going to come and say, please raise my gasoline tax.
I think Christine is absolutely correct on the issue. Once the cost gets so high, there'll be a change.
Or frustration, cost or frustration.
I think that the groups that have been developing in almost every community for economic development are a key group to help educate and to look forward. Business people have traditionally been better and farther sighted planners than bureaucrats and government folks. And I think that the combination of business people and government folks in those economic development kinds of forums might be a real key in terms of looking beyond the next election, looking beyond a short time horizon to say, what is this community going to need in 20 years? How can we prevent the problems of California from happening here in Indiana? That's what we as leaders ought to be working on, and there's some that are doing that.
In a partnership, and I think the key to it is that in so many years of our history, we've all been individual groups that didn't really work together, and the successes we've had in this community in recent years have become are a result of really working together.
Yeah, and I think a consensus has to come, and we have to get citizens to think long-term as opposed to short-term. And so far, we should think short-term.
I think we need all the help we can get, but I also think we have a good test case right here in Delaware County. 332 is an excellent highway. We needed that for Muncie. We needed the direct 4-lane link to the highway. It's a quick, accessible trip now, but maybe 10 years from now or 15 years from now, I wonder if we all sit here, if it's going to be a stoplight at every corner and something that rather than encourages the flow of traffic to the interstate, impedes it. So I think we have a test case right here.
And we're trying, and I can tell you as a chamber, we're trying to keep it the intended purpose, the rapid access way. And I think you can have intelligent growth along a rapid access way with the right planned access points off of that. But everybody wants the driveway, directly to them. And we've got to make people aware that they can thrive in an intelligently planned transportation system. You don't have to have a driveway off the major artery right to their business directly. In fact, that's going to become a liability.
Yeah, I think to try to answer that question in terms of who's going to educate us on this issue, it's going to come from the private sector. Government in this country, as opposed to Europe, for example, doesn't seem to be able to come up with a consensus. So apparently it's going to go back into the hands of the private sector and the citizen again.
Christine, you and the governor have been running our transportation policy for something less than 2 years now. Do we have a long-term policy formulated? Is it?
Well, I'm glad you asked. You said we were running the policy for 2 years. Well, the state doesn't have a policy, actually. We've got principles and policies that we're acting on and making decisions about every day, but we've never articulated that. And my department's in the process right now of developing strategies that would then be open to public debate and public forum on what the transportation strategies ought to be for Indiana. Many of those are simply articulation of what we are doing now, but others are more farsighted. And we're working on that right now and hope to have something in the next several months, in fact.
What problems in 20 years are we anticipating that this plan will be addressing? Can you speak specifics to this?
Well, the problems of rural access will probably still be extant in a state like Indiana, where we won't be totally populated statewide. The problems of the transportation issues for the aging population are key. The cost of accommodating environmental issues and natural resources issues as we build infrastructure. And I absolutely believe that environmental and natural resources issues not only can be accommodated, but ought to be accommodated in our building of infrastructure. I do not think they're inconsistent. And sometimes there isn't even extra cost if you get those engineers to work together on things. The cost of building public transportation systems and pavements will continue to be one of the primary issues in how we do that.
And the maintenance.
Exactly.
Christine, I get the impression that there is not going to be a third major airport in Lake County for Chicago. Is that correct?
Well, that's a wrong impression. I think that a lot of the publicity that surrounded some of the disagreements between us and Chicago and the governor and Mayor Barnes gave people the impression that Gary and Lake County was out of the running. It absolutely is still in the running. It's one of 5 sites. There is no data yet about any of the sites that knock them out of the box. And we are continuing forward to develop the Gary Regional Airport as a viable reliever airport to the congestion in O'Hare now, as well as continuing our work to get the Gary site designated as a 3rd regional site. So we're very much still on track with that.
If you were a gambler, what would you say the odds are?
I don't know.
You're not
I'm not a gambler. I'm really not. I don't buy lottery tickets even. That's right. That's right.
Larry,
Chris, how do you
people
feel?
don't gamble in Lake County.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. My
What about,
mistake.
what about toll roads? What factor do you see toll roads?
Well, we're pleased that the national policy has advocated allowing federal funds for toll roads, but we don't think it's a panacea. You have to have a lot of traffic to make toll roads viable, and we think they may be a good alternative in some corridors. We don't have any great plans for that here in Indiana because we don't have any corridors where we would be building a brand new road where a toll structure seems to fit.
You know, it's sort of like here in Delaware County. We have a plan here in terms of land use and transportation as well, but sometimes the politicians, those who are to enact the plan to carry it out, don't follow the planner's wishes. I assume the legislature is going to be the same sort of thing. You're dealing with
Sure.
the political aspect of implementing policy.
Exactly. And I mean, it's our job in the department to prepare enough logic and facts so that the legislators can make the best decisions given enough data. And I'm not sure they've been given enough good planning and factual data about the condition of our transportation system as a whole to make the best decisions. But that is their job ultimately. It's my job to give them data.
What's the status of the Evansville to Indy link?
Well, we have just begun specific location and environmental studies throughout the entire corridor. We've got several $1 million worth of studies going on right now. The next step would be to proceed with specific road design for some portion of that corridor, which would happen in a couple years.
You don't see, light rail, for example, you don't see the prospects of having an interurban kind of line between here and Indianapolis. For example, Ball State professors, or some at least, now live in Indianapolis and work in Muncie. You don't see anything like that in the next 25 years, do you?
I would love to see something like that in the next 25 years. And I would like to find a way, working with the federal government and the state legislature, to encourage more of that. No, I definitely believe, I'd love to see the interurban back. That's exactly what we need for some of the issues that we've been talking about, I think.
Is the state, how open are you to funding some kind of demonstration project? Maybe not that ambitious a demonstration project, but for example, on a college campus for a people movers.
I mean, being open to it and having the money for it are two different things. I mean, our public transit funding now comes from the sales tax. And in days like today, I mean, the sales tax is down from what we expected it to be, and therefore our portion for public transit is down. The federal government has reduced funding by about 60% from traditional levels over the last 10 years for public transit. So it's going to be very tough without changes in legislation.
We're out of time. We're out of money. Thanks, Russ Sloan, Christine Letts, Tom Lowe, John Rouse for being with us. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for all the good years on Public Affairs Roundtable. See you around.
Public Affairs Roundtable is produced in the studios of WIPB Channel 49 on the campus of Ball State University. The producer is John Rouse. Listener comments are welcome.